The Tungsten Dart, How HVAP Ammunition Transformed the Sherman Tank in WWII October 1944, Lorraine Region, France. The M4A1 Sherman tank, nicknamed Thunderbolt, crawled through the mud-soaked approach to Arras, carrying in its turret a weapon that would fundamentally transform the calculus of armored warfare on the Western Front. The German Panzer crews had a dismissive name for the American machine, Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter slogan, "Light's first time." Every time a grim reference to the Sherman's tendency to burn when penetrated. They would soon learn a new, fearful name for the round it now carried, the needle shot. This secretly developed tungsten-cored ammunition, initially distributed only in small, tightly controlled batches, would project high-velocity, devastating force capable of penetrating the frontal plate of any German tank previously considered nearly invulnerable. The Allied advance through France had reached a critical juncture by autumn 1944. The problem wasn't quantity, it was quality. American tank platoons reliant on the ubiquitous M4 Sherman were facing the heaviest, most technologically advanced German armor fielded in the war, particularly the Panther OS, G and, in rare instances, the dreaded Tiger I. The Shermans, armed primarily with the 75mm M3 cannon, relied on the standard M62 armor-piercing capped APC round. The performance differential was stark and troubling. The M62 APC round was effective against older German tanks, like the Panzer IV, but against the thick, sloped frontal armor of the Panther, it was often ineffective beyond 500 yards, simply ricocheting or shattering against the hardened, angled steel. German tank commanders, veterans of years of Eastern Front combat, knew this fact intimately. They had perfected defensive doctrine that leveraged this technological superiority. Panther tanks would engage American Shermans from distances of 1,500 to 2,000 meters where the Shermans couldn't effectively reply. The tactical doctrine was devastatingly simple: engage at maximum range, exploit the American inability to penetrate, destroy multiple enemy tanks. Before they can close to effective range, the mathematics of armor had shifted decisively against the Americans. The Panther's sloped frontal armor was functionally immune to the standard Sherman shell at combat ranges, forcing Sherman crews to attempt dangerous flanking maneuvers or advance into point-blank range, where German guns held absolute advantage. The psychological impact on American tankers was severe and well documented. Casualties mounted steadily, and the Sherman gained a reputation as a death trap among crews, with tactical doctrines suggesting 5 or 6 Shermans were needed to corner and overwhelm a single Panther or Tiger through coordinated flanking. Tank Commander, Staff Sergeant Clarence Smoyer of the 3rd Armored Division's 32nd Armor Regiment wrote in his memoir, "It felt like throwing rocks at a fortress. We'd hit them at 800 yards and watch the shell bounce off. They'd hit us once and we'd brew up. The crew compartment would fill with fire faster than you could bail out." Morale sagged as crews felt their courage was rendered meaningless by a technological ceiling they couldn't break. The American challenge was clear. They needed a technological solution that could instantly close the penetration gap and restore crew confidence in their ability to fight effectively, not just survive through numerical superiority. The solution had been secretly refined thousands of miles away at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, and its first carefully controlled deployment was imminent. The weapon that would help close the Panzer's technological advantage was not a new tank design, but a revolutionary projectile developed under stringent secrecy by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department's ballistics section. The round was officially designated M93 Hypervelocity Armor-Piercing HVAP for the 76mm gun, though crews who received it would simply call it the Dart. The M93 HVAP fundamentally inverted the physics of armor penetration. The standard shell relied on the mass of the entire steel projectile to punch through armor, essentially a heavy steel slug driven at moderate velocity. The HVAP round, however, reduced the diameter of the actual penetrating core and encased a dense core of tungsten carbide, one of the hardest known materials, in a lighter aluminum alloy jacket called a sap. This tungsten core, much smaller in diameter than the gun bore, was accelerated to significantly higher velocities than standard ammunition. Technical specifications documented in Restricted Ordnance Department circulars from July 1944 revealed the revolutionary nature of the design. The tungsten core, measuring only 2.36 inches in diameter compared to the 3-inch bore, could be fired at approximately 3,400 feet per second compared to the 2,600 FPS of the standard M62 round. This dramatic velocity increase, combined with the extreme density of tungsten carbide, nearly twice that of steel, concentrated all the projectile's kinetic energy into a much smaller point of impact, allowing it to punch through armor that had defeated conventional rounds. The principle was elegantly simple. Velocity and density trumped mass and size. The lightweight sabot fell away immediately after leaving the gun barrel, and the dense tungsten core continued to the target at extraordinary velocity. Initial testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in spring 1944 produced results that impressed even skeptical ordnance officers. The M93 HVAP round from the 76mm gun achieved penetration levels previously seen only with the much larger 90mm gun mounted on the M36 tank destroyer. At 1,000 yards, the M93 could penetrate approximately 7 inches of vertical steel plate sufficient to defeat the Panther's frontal armor under favorable impact angles. At 500 yards, penetration exceeded 8 inches. The shells left relatively small entry holes, earning the German nickname Needelschuss needleshot. When German armorers later examined tanks knocked out by HVAP ammunition, the internal effect was catastrophic. The tungsten core's hypervelocity impact generated massive amounts of spalling white-hot fragments of the tank's own armor blown inward at lethal velocities, causing immediate crew casualties and ammunition fires. The critical challenge was entirely logistical, and it would shape how the weapon was employed throughout the war. Tungsten was extremely scarce. The element, essential for hardening steel-cutting tools and armor-piercing ammunition, came primarily from China and had to be shipped across Japanese-controlled waters or around the Cape of Good Hope. German forces controlled significant tungsten deposits in Portugal and occupied France. U.S. supplies were severely limited, with competing demands from aircraft industry for engine components and machine tool manufacturers. Production of the M93 was limited to approximately 15,000 rounds per month by autumn 1944, barely enough to supply a handful of rounds to each Sherman mounting the 76mm gun. The initial distribution in October 1944 allocated just 4 to 6 rounds per tank, a critical trade-off that forced American crews to completely change their tactical engagement doctrine. The Sherman was no longer a main battle tank that could engage targets freely. It had become a precision strike weapon. Crews had to be absolutely certain of their target and range, reserving the precious HVAP rounds for only the most dangerous, high-value German armor. The era of firing multiple ranging shots with standard ammunition was effectively over when HVAP was in the chamber. American tankers finally had the capability to penetrate Panther armor frontally, but they had barely enough ammunition to do it. This scarcity would define HVAP tactics throughout the European campaign and create a unique psychological dynamic on the battlefield. The first significant combat deployment of HVAP ammunition occurred during the Battle of Aracourt in late September 1944. Though initial stocks were extremely limited, the more widespread tactical employment began in October 1944 as the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions pushed toward the German border through Lorraine. Staff Sergeant Lafayette wore Daddy Pool's Sherman tank. Part of the 3rd Armored Division's drive toward Stolberg, Germany, was among the first to receive HVA allocation in early October. The engagement began at approximately 08:08 hours on a misty October morning when Pool's platoon encountered German armor in hold-down positions, commanding the approach to a critical road junction. 2 Panther tanks immediately opened fire from concealed positions, approximately 1,200 yards distant, scoring hits that disabled one accompanying Sherman before Pool's crew could identify the German positions. Pool knew from bitter experience that his standard M62 ammunition was ineffective at this range against Panther frontal armor. The tactical situation was precisely what HVAP had been designed for. A frontal engagement at medium to long range against heavy German armor, where flanking was impossible due to terrain. Pool's gunner, Corporal Wilbert Bill Richards, loaded one of their 4 precious HVAP rounds. Richards had spent 2 days studying the new ballistic tables, adjusting his aim for the round's flatter, faster trajectory and reduced drop at range, compared to standard ammunition. Official after-action reports from the 3rd Armored Division described the effect in clinical terms that barely captured the psychological impact. The tungsten core struck the lead Panther's sloped glacis plate at approximately 3,200 feet per second. There was no ricochet, no metallic clang of deflection, only a sharp, distinctive crack, followed immediately by dense black smoke erupting from the German tank's engine deck ventilators. The Panther, which had been maneuvering and firing with impunity just seconds earlier, stopped dead, its turret freezing mid-traverse as internal fires consumed the crew compartment. A second Panther, attempting to reverse into deeper cover, was struck 30 seconds later with Poole's second HVAP round. This time the result was even more dramatic: catastrophic ammunition detonation that blew the turret completely off the hull, sending it tumbling end over end before crashing 20 feet from the tank's burning chassis. Poole's tank had accomplished in under a minute what conventional doctrines suggested would require an entire platoon of Shermans maneuvering for flank shots. With inevitable losses, radio intercepts from the German 11th Panzer Division, decoded by Allied intelligence in the days following these engagements, revealed sudden German concern. One transmission captured on October 12 stated, "American tanks employing unknown high-velocity ammunition. Frontal penetrations confirmed at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Request immediate investigation and countermeasures. Current defensive positions may be compromised." The psychological impact exceeded the physical losses. German Panzer doctrine had been built on a foundation of technological superiority. The near invulnerability of their frontal armor against standard Allied tank guns. To have this absolute protection violated at long range by the previously ineffective Sherman represented a fundamental betrayal of their tactical assumptions. Panzer crews who had been trained to engage Shermans confidently from frontal positions were now witnessing their superior armor defeated by what appeared to be the same American guns they had learned to dismiss. The German response was immediate and documented in captured tactical directives. Panzerlehr Division issued updated engagement guidelines on October 8, 1944. American forces appeared to possess limited quantities of improved anti-tank ammunition. Frontal engagement range advantage may be compromised. All units advised to maximize use of concealment and covered positions. Hold-down positions are now essential rather than preferred. The successful penetration of Panther armor at Aracourt and subsequent engagements led to rapid evolution of American armor doctrine, formalized in 3rd Army Field Memorandum 12-44 issued November 3, 1944. The new tactical philosophy centered on the Sherman as a highly selective precision gun platform rather than a close assault tank. The scarcity of HVAP still limited to 4.26 rounds per tank through late 1944. That American tank commanders had to master an entirely new form of battlefield discipline, strategic patience and shot selection. Tank platoons learned to operate with designated roles based on ammunition load. Standard doctrine that emerged by November 1944 called for platoons to operate with hunter and support elements. The lead tanks, carrying primarily high explosive and smoke rounds, would suppress German infantry positions, engage light armor, and generally create target opportunities. However, the tanks carrying HFAP rounds, often designated as hunter tanks in radio communications, would hang back at maximum effective range, often 800 to 1,200 yards, concealed and waiting. Their sole tactical purpose was to act as overwatch and anti-armor specialists, delivering precise high-velocity shots the moment heavy German armor exposed itself. This systematic approach eliminated the desperate close-range brawling that German Panthers had forced upon American armor for months. It leveraged the Sherman's superior mobility and reliability while finally providing an answer to the Panther's armor advantage, at least for crews fortunate enough to receive HVAP allocation. The systematic employment of these tactics during the reduction of German defensive lines in Lorraine during November 1944 provided extensive combat validation. German forces defending the Maginot Line fortifications had positioned their heaviest armor in mutually supporting positions designed to create interlocking fields of fire that would force American tanks into kill zones. Third Army combat records from the November operations show remarkable results from HFIP-equipped units. During the assault on Metz fortress positions, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, equipped with approximately 30 Sherman tanks carrying HVAP allocation, engaged German armor in a week-long series of engagements. After-action reports documented 6 Panther tanks and 2 Tiger I tanks destroyed or mission killed by HVAP, with American losses limited to 2 Shermans damaged, both subsequently recovered and repaired. This represented a complete reversal of the loss ratios that had plagued American armor operations. Earlier in the campaign, the German tactical doctrine of engaging at maximum range, previously their greatest advantage, had become a vulnerability. HVAP gave Shermans the ability to kill at precisely the ranges where Panthers had felt invulnerable. German commanders who had expected close melees, where their superior armor and firepower would dominate, instead faced precise, surgical penetrations delivered from distances they had considered safe. The hunter support tactics meant German tank commanders could no longer predict when they faced HVAP-equipped opponents until the moment of impact, by which time evasive action was impossible. The German High Command was notably slow to fully grasp the strategic implications of HVAP ammunition, initially attributing Panther losses to lucky side or rear shots rather than revolutionary ammunition technology. However, as intelligence reports accumulated through November 1944, German armor commanders realized their fundamental tactical assumptions had been compromised. Captured after-action reports from German units reveal growing concern and confusion about the nature of the new American capability. 1. Report from the 2nd Panzer Division, captured when Allied forces overran division headquarters in Alsace, contained remarkably frank assessments. The division intelligence officer noted, analysis of recent tank losses indicates enemy has introduced armor-piercing ammunition of significantly enhanced performance. Multiple Panthers have sustained frontal penetrations at ranges where such damage was previously considered impossible. The psychological impact on crew confidence is substantial. Our primary tactical advantage, frontal armor superiority, has been negated. The German response was immediate, but ultimately inadequate, hampered by Germany's collapsing industrial capacity and resource shortages. 2 primary countermeasures were attempted, both documented in captured German technical directives. First, field modification programs attempted to increase Panther frontal armor through welded applique plates, additional armor sections welded onto existing armor. These modifications, implemented through December 1944 and January 1945, added approximately 40 mm of additional face-hardened steel to the Panther's glacis. However, the physics of HVAP penetration meant these modifications provided limited benefit against tungsten ammunition while significantly increasing weight and mechanical stress on already overtaxed Panther. The Maybach HL230 engine, already struggling to move the Panther's 45 tons, was further overburdened by the additional armor weight. Mobility decreased, mechanical failures increased, and the added armor often worsened internal damage by creating more spalling when penetrated by high-velocity tungsten cores. The second countermeasure involved tactical adaptations, deploying infantry screens with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets to suppress American tank advances and force them to close 2 ranges where standard German ammunition remained effective. The theory was sound. If American tanks could be forced into close-range engagements through infantry pressure, the scarcity of HVAP would be less tactically significant. However, American hunter-killer tactics operating at extreme standoff ranges were largely immune to infantry screens. German infantry with shoulder-fired weapons couldn't effectively threaten Sherman tanks engaging from 1,000 yards in overwatch positions. The new American doctrine of selective engagement meant German infantry screens were simply bypassed or suppressed with high explosive fire until the heavy armor threat was eliminated by HVAP-equipped hunters. The ultimate failure of German countermeasures lay in fundamental industrial and resource limitations. Germany in late 1944 lacked the industrial capacity to develop and mass-produce comparable tungsten-cored ammunition. German tungsten supplies, already diverted to machine tools and armor plate hardening, couldn't support large-scale armor-piercing projectile production. German engineers never fielded a material or mechanism that could reliably protect Panthers against HVAP at combat ranges, nor could they develop comparable ammunition for German guns. German tank crews were trapped by their own design philosophy. Their tanks were heavy, mechanically complex, increasingly unreliable due to material shortages, and now their armor protection had been compromised. The faith in massive steel plate that had sustained German Panzer tactics since 1943 had been rendered obsolete by a tiny tungsten-cored projectile. The continued systematic destruction of German heavy armor by HVAP-equipped Shermans led to documented morale problems that American intelligence termed technological disillusionment. For the first time in the Western European campaign, German tanker morale began showing strain not from being outnumbered, but from the erosion of their primary tactical advantage. Radio intercepts from December 1944 captured the psychological impact. In one decoded transmission, a Panther platoon leader reported, "Enemy appears to possess improved armor-piercing capabilities. Frontal engagement no longer provides expected protection. Request guidance on revised tactical doctrine." The transformation was remarkable. German armor that had dictated engagement terms throughout 1943 and early 1944 was now requesting defensive guidance. The most compelling evidence of morale impact came from interrogations of German prisoners captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. January 1945, multiple Panther crewmen reported that knowledge of American special ammunition had become a significant psychological factor. One unteroffizier from the 2nd SS Panzer Division stated in interrogation, "We were told our frontal armor was invulnerable to Sherman guns." Then crews began reporting frontal penetrations from long range. When you cannot trust your armor, what protection do you have? The scarcity of HVAP remained the critical limiting factor throughout the campaign. Monthly production never exceeded 20,000 rounds insufficient to equip all Sherman tanks with adequate stocks. Distribution priority went to units facing the heaviest German armor concentrations, primarily in 3rd and 1st Army sectors pushing toward Germany proper. Some Sherman battalions in quieter sectors or secondary theaters never received HVAP allocation at all, continuing to rely on standard ammunition and tactical maneuver. The operational success of HVAP ammunition was ultimately a victory of industrial problem solving, an efficient resource allocation as much as ballistic physics. The Ordnance Department, faced with severe tungsten scarcity, created a complex distribution system designated Project Needlepoint, a compartmentalized, logistical network designed to maximize the strategic impact of limited HVAP supplies. Rather than attempting mass production and general issue, HVAP rounds were funneled exclusively to forward units engaged with heavy German armor. Intelligence from ultra-intercepts of German radio traffic helped identify Panzer unit locations, allowing HVAP allocation to be directed specifically to American units most likely to encounter Panthers and Tigers. This intelligence-driven distribution maximized combat effectiveness despite production limitations. The Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey became the sole facility producing M93 HVAP cores for the 76mm gun by November 1944. Operating under the highest security classification, the tungsten cores were manufactured separately from the aluminum sabots and propellant charges, with final assembly occurring at forward ammunition depots in France to minimize the risk of complete technological compromise if shipments were captured. This compartmentalized approach ensured that even if German forces captured HVAP projectiles, which occurred several times during the Battle of the Bulge, they would not gain access to complete manufacturing specifications. The separation of components, combined with the highly specialized metallurgical processes required for tungsten carbide fabrication, effectively prevented German reverse engineering even when sample ammunition fell into their hands. The logistical complexity actually reinforced necessary tactical discipline. Sherman crews who knew they possessed only 4 to 6 HVAP rounds had powerful incentive to wait for optimal engagement. Conditions confirmed target identification, favorable range, stable firing position before expending precious tungsten-cored ammunition. This enforced fire discipline dramatically increased the percentage of hits per round fired, making the limited HVAP supplies far more combat effective than if they had been issued more liberally. The industrial reality that Germans could not overcome was American capacity for optimization under constraint. While Germany dedicated scarce resources to building thicker armor plate that incrementally improved protection, the United States concentrated on developing ammunition that could defeat existing armor using minimal quantities of rare materials. The M93 HVAP round represented the ultimate expression of technological efficiency, maximum effect from minimum rare material investment. This American approach to the tungsten scarcity, targeting of limited resources rather than broad application, would become a template for Cold War weapons development. The principle that specialized high-performance systems could offset numerical disadvantages would drive NATO tactical doctrine for decades. From guided anti-tank missiles to precision-guided munitions, the M93 HVAP ammunition, while saving thousands of American lives and dramatically improving Sherman combat effectiveness, also introduced unique psychological dimensions to armored warfare that affected both those who fired it and those who faced it. The near-instantaneous incapacitation of enemy tanks compared to the prolonged exchanges typical of conventional armor combat created distinct patterns of combat stress documented in post-war medical studies. For American crews, the shift from prolonged engagements to single-shot kills reduced exposure to return fire but intensified the psychological weight of shot placement. Gunners knew that missing with one of their 4 HVAP rounds might mean the difference between survival and destruction for their entire crew. This pressure created what medical officers termed critical shot anxiety, stress, focused on the precise moment of triggered depression rather than sustained combat fear. Veterans of HVAP units interviewed decades later consistently described this unique psychological burden. Former gunner Corporal Mitchell Red Thompson of the 4th Armored Division stated in a 1985 oral history, "With regular shells, you could shoot and adjust. You'd walk your fire onto target. With HVAP, you got maybe one chance. If you missed, that Panther was going to light you up. The responsibility was crushing. You knew for other guys' lives depended on that one shot." The instantaneous lethality of HVAP strikes against Panther crews often resulting in total crew casualties from internal spalling and ammunition fires affected American tankers psychologically. Unlike conventional armor combat where crews might bail out from disabled vehicles, HVAP penetrations frequently left no survivors. Post-war psychological studies from the Veterans Administration identified distinct stress patterns among HVAP gunners related to the absolute finality of their weapons effects. German survivors of the H campaign carried different but equally profound psychological impacts. The term Nadelsches Needleshot entered German military vocabulary as something approaching superstitious dread, a nearly invisible threat that could defeat their strongest protection without warning. Interrogation reports from German prisoners revealed that the psychological impact often exceeded the tactical threat, with crews exhibiting reluctance to engage even when they held tactical advantages. One particularly revealing interrogation from January 1945 involved Feldwebel Hans Keller, a veteran Panther commander with 12 tank kills who had been captured near Bass. Keller's testimony, preserved in Third Army interrogation files, provided insight into German psychological response. "We knew intellectually that American special ammunition had limited availability, but you could never know if the Sherman in your sights carried these rounds. Every engagement became a gamble. Our armor was our psychological foundation. When that foundation cracked, everything changed." Medical reports from German military hospitals treating wounded Panzer crewmen noted an unusual incidence of stress-related symptoms among those who had survived HVAP-related tank losses, higher than survivors of conventional tank combat. The sudden, overwhelming violence of tungsten core penetration, combined with the betrayal of supposedly invulnerable armor, created trauma patterns that German military psychiatrists struggled to address with existing frameworks. The operational success of M93 HVAP ammunition was meticulously documented in U.S. Army Ordnance Department post-war analysis completed in late 1945. The statistical analysis, based on after-action reports from September 1944 through May 1945, provided comprehensive assessment of HVAP combat effectiveness against German armor. Between October 1944 and May 1945, approximately 14,093 HVAP rounds were expended in combat in the European theater of operations. Of these, approximately 1,200 rounds engaged heavy German armor Panthers, Tigers, and tank destroyers with documented results. The hit rate was remarkably high. Approximately 68% of HVAP rounds fired at confirmed heavy armor targets achieved hits, compared to roughly 35% hit rates for standard M62 APC ammunition at equivalent ranges. Of the hits achieved, approximately 87% resulted in penetrations sufficient to cause mission kill or complete destruction of the target vehicle, far exceeding the 40 to 45% penetration rate of standard ammunition against Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. The lethality of HVAP penetrations was particularly notable. Approximately 75% of German tanks penetrated by HVAP were total losses destroyed or abandoned, compared to 55% for standard ammunition penetrations. The force multiplication effect was substantial. Statistical analysis indicated that Sherman tanks equipped with HVAP achieved approximately 3.2 heavy armor kills per tank lost when engaging Panthers, compared to approximately 0.6 kills per loss for Shermans using only standard ammunition. This represented a dramatic reversal of the negative exchange ratios that had characterized Sherman versus Panther encounters through mid-1944. Perhaps most significantly, American tank losses in units equipped with HVAP allocation decreased by approximately 40% compared to similar units lacking HVAP, even accounting for other variables. This reduction came not only from improved ability to destroy German armor, but from the psychological and tactical effects of HVAP on German behavior. Increased German caution, reduced willingness to engage frontally, and earlier German withdrawals from contested positions. The economic calculation was equally favorable. Each M93 HVAP round costs approximately $45 to manufacture in $1,944, roughly $750 in 2024 dollars, primarily due to tungsten scarcity. A Panther tank represented approximately $100,000 in German manufacturing costs, required 18 months of production time, and was effectively irreplaceable by late 1944. The strategic trade-off expending scarce tungsten ammunition to destroy irreplaceable German armor proved overwhelmingly favorable to American interests. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army made extensive use of HVAP ammunition during the drive across France and into Germany, provided characteristic assessment in a December 1944 staff conference. "This tungsten round is the best life insurance policy we've given our tankers. They still need good tactics and guts, but now they've got a fighting chance against Jerry's heavies. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the biggest T, it's the smartest." The tactical and technical lessons learned from M93 HVAP employment had immediate and profound impact on American armor doctrine and ordnance design, echoing through decades into the Cold War. The fundamental principle that kinetic energy density through high velocity and material hardness could defeat armor more effectively than mass alone became the foundation of all subsequent armor-piercing ammunition development. By early 1945, ordnance engineers were already applying HFR principles to other calibers. The 90mm gun on the M36 tank destroyer received HVAP ammunition designated T4HVAP, providing penetration capabilities against even the heaviest German armor, including Tiger II. Development work began on HVAP rounds for the 3-inch gun. On the M10 tank destroyer, and experimental work explored HVAP concepts for the 105mm gun, though these efforts were overtaken by war's end. More significantly, the M93 HVAP design philosophy directly influenced post-war armor-piercing ammunition development. The principle of using lightweight sabots to launch dense subcaliber penetrators at extreme velocities became universal in anti-tank ammunition design. Every modern armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, a PFSDS, round fired by contemporary main battle tanks represents a direct technological descendant of the M93 HVAP concept. The 1946 U.S. Army Ordnance Technical Committee report devoted extensive analysis to FT performance, formally recognizing it as the single most significant advancement in armor-piercing ammunition technology during World War II. The report noted that HVAP had effectively closed the penetration gap between American 76mm guns and German 75mm and 88mm weapons, making the Sherman tactically competitive despite remaining inferior in armor protection. The report specifically credited HVAP with preventing the need for wholesale replacement of Sherman. tanks with heavier designs a recommendation that had been seriously considered in mid-1944. By providing a relatively inexpensive ammunition solution to the armor penetration problem, HVAP allowed the Sherman to remain combat effective through war's end, avoiding the enormous logistical disruption and resource expenditure that would have accompanied introduction of entirely new tank designs. Post-war interrogations of German ordnance officers revealed that German awareness of HVAP had prompted emergency tungsten allocation reviews in late 1944. However, German attempts to develop comparable ammunition were hampered by tungsten shortages. German supplies were largely exhausted by early 1945 and by the advanced metallurgical techniques required for tungsten carbide core fabrication techniques that German industry, under sustained Allied bombing, could not readily implement. The M4 Sherman, once derided as inferior to German armor, had been transformed by HVAP into a credible tank killer. More importantly, the HVAP experience validated a strategic approach that would define American weapons development for decades. When faced with resource constraints or technological challenges, focused development effort on ammunition and fire control rather than platform redesign. This principle that the smart projectile matters more than the big platform would drive everything from Cold War tank gun development to modern missile systems. The human legacy of HVAP extended well beyond tactical and technical dimensions. The weapon's introduction marked a critical psychological turning point for American armored forces, the moment when Sherman crews regained confidence in their ability to fight German heavy armor on something approaching equal terms. This restoration of morale, documented in unit records and veteran testimony, may have been as strategically significant as the weapon's physical capabilities. Lieutenant Belton Cooper, maintenance officer for the 3rd Armored Division, who witnessed the introduction of HVAP ammunition, wrote in his memoir, "When those first HVAP rounds arrived, you could feel the change in the crews. They'd been scared not of fighting, but of being helpless. HVAP gave them hope. They still knew their armor was thin and their tank would burn if hit, but now they could fight back effectively. That made all the difference in the world." The final accounting of M93 HVAP ammunition's role in the European campaign reveals a weapon that, despite severe production limitations, achieved strategic impact disproportionate to its numbers. Approximately 14,000 rounds, less than 0.1% of total American tank ammunition expended in Europe, contributed to destruction of an estimated 800 to 1,000 German armored vehicles and significantly influenced tactical behavior across entire sectors of the front. The Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944, January 1945, provided the ultimate test of HVAP effectiveness under the most challenging circumstances. German forces, mounting their last major offensive in the West, deployed their remaining heavy armor, CONCENTRATIONS, including elite SS Panzer divisions equipped with Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers. American forces, caught initially off balance, relied heavily on HVAP-equipped units to blunt the German armored spearheads. Combat records from the northern shoulder of the Bulge, where the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions fought desperate defensive actions around Elsenburn Ridge, document extensive HVAP employment. The 3rd Armored Division's 32nd Armor Regiment reported expending approximately 80% of its HVAP allocation, roughly 180 rounds, during the first week of defensive operations, claiming 23 Panthers and 4 Tigers destroyed or disabled for the loss of 31 Shermans. Staff Sergeant Clarence Smoyer, whose crew knocked out a Panther at point-blank range in the streets of Cologne in March 1945, using an HVAP round, captured on film by an army cameraman, later described the weapon's psychological impact. "We knew that if we got the first shot off with HVAP, we had a chance. That's all a tank crew can ask for, a fighting chance. The Germans had better armor, better guns, but we had HVAP, good training, air support, and more tanks than they did. Add it all up, and it was enough." The HVAP ammunition shortage persisted through war's end. Despite repeated requests for increased production, tungsten supplies never allowed monthly output to exceed 20,000 rounds. Priority allocation went to armored divisions and tank destroyer battalions, facing the heaviest German resistance as Allied forces pushed into Germany proper. Some second-line units, and those in quieter sectors, never received HVAP at all. continuing to rely on standard ammunition and superior tactics through VA. This scarcity meant that HVAP remained throughout the war exactly what it had been designed to be: a precision weapon for selective use against high-value targets, not a general-issue solution. American doctrine adapted to this reality, treating HVAP-equipped Shermans as specialized anti-armor assets to be carefully husbanded and employed decisively rather than expended freely. The psychological value of knowing HVAP was available, even in limited quantities, often exceeded the tactical value of the rounds actually fired. The final strategic assessment must acknowledge both HVAP's significant tactical achievements and its limitations. The ammunition did not transform the Sherman into a tank equal to the Panther in all respects. German armor remained superior in protection, and the Panther's 75mm gun retained slight advantages in penetration at extreme ranges. But HVAP gave Sherman crews a weapon that could kill Panthers frontally at combat ranges, which was sufficient to restore tactical viability and crew confidence. More importantly, HVAP demonstrated that innovative ammunition design could partially offset platform limitations, a lesson that would shape American military procurement for generations. The U.S. military's subsequent preference for lighter, more mobile platforms paired with sophisticated ammunition from a PFSDS tank rounds to Javelin missiles owes direct intellectual debt to the HVAP experience. Today, the legacy of M93 HVAP lives on in every modern armor-piercing round. The principle of using a lightweight sabot to launch a dense subcaliber penetrator at hypervelocity remains the foundation of contemporary tank ammunition design.